A girl fed a stray dog. The next day he did something that left everyone horrified, and the girl's father was forced to call the police. Have you ever made a small gesture that changed your life forever? Something so simple, so natural, that it seemed like just another ordinary moment of the day. But that somehow triggered a series of unexpected events. Often it is these small actions, a look, a smile, a gesture of kindness, that change not only the life of those who receive them, but also our own journey. That's exactly how it all started for Sophia, a girl of just 8 years old who, without knowing it, was about to take the first step in a story she would never forget. That was a cold and cloudy day. The sky, heavy and grey, threatened rain, and the sharp wind made dry leaves dance across the ground. The streets were emptier than usual, and the few passers-by hurried past, hidden under coats and scarves. Sophia, with her colourful backpack and slightly rumpled school uniform, walked along the same path as always, kicking some pebbles along the way and holding the snack that was left over from the lunch. She wasn't that hungry, so she planned to save that bread for later. That was when his eyes fell on a scene that, for many, would go unnoticed. Near an old bench in the square, among a pile of leaves and crumpled newspapers, a dog was huddled against the worn wood. His body was shaking, maybe from the cold, maybe from fear, or who knows, both. He seemed invisible to the rest of the world. People passed around him without even noticing his presence, and even those who saw him looked away, as if he were just part of the landscape. Sophia stopped. Something inside her stopped her from continuing walking. Maybe it was the way that dog tried to hide, making himself small as if he had no right to be there. Maybe it was his look, deep, almost human, filled with a mix of distrust and sadness. His eyes were large and dark, and for a moment, Sophia felt that he was watching her as much as she was watching him. He was a golden-coated mutt, although dirt and neglect had dulled some of the natural shine in his coat. He was thin, so thin that his ribs were visible beneath his thin skin. His ears, slightly drooped, indicated that one day he might have been a dog full of energy and life, but now he looked exhausted, suffered. For a moment he didn't move. It was as if he was trying to camouflage himself, as if he expected her to just go on her way, just like everyone else. But Sophia wasn't like the others. With careful steps she approached, kneeling at a safe distance so as not to startle him. The dog raised its head a little, sniffing the air. His body was tense, ready to flee at any sign of danger. Sophia delicately opened her backpack and removed the piece of bread she kept. He held it in the palm of his hand, slowly extending it towards the dog. She didn't say anything, just waited. The dog hesitated. His eyes alternated between the girl and the bread, as if trying to decide if this was real or just a dream. His paws took a small step forward, then another. Hunger was a cruel enemy, and even fear could not completely overcome it. Then, in a quick, almost desperate movement, he picked up the bread and stepped back, chewing greedily as if he feared someone would take it away from him. His eyes were still fixed on the girl, evaluating her, trying to understand why she did that. Sophia smiled slightly. He didn't try to touch. He didn't try to force any contact. She just watched as he devoured the food, and for a brief moment she swore she saw his tail wag, almost imperceptible, but it was there. She knew she couldn't stay there forever. Her mother was waiting for her at home, and the cold was starting to get more intense. He stood up slowly, picked up his backpack, and looked at the dog one last time before continuing on his way. But what she didn't know was that that small gesture had been the beginning of something much bigger. Because that night, while the city slept and the streetlights cast long shadows over the streets, that same dog, who until then had no name, who belonged to no one, made a decision. He followed Sophia, and the next day, something happened that would forever change her life, and his. Have you ever experienced a moment when you felt like an animal chose you? Something inexplicable, a connection that seemed to happen for no reason, but that, deep down, made perfect sense. Billy didn't choose Sophia by chance. Like many street dogs, he just needed a look, a chance, someone who saw beyond the dirt and hunger. Now, I want to hear from you. Has anything similar happened in your life? Has an animal ever crossed your path and made you feel like it wasn't a coincidence? Tell us in the comments. I read them all. If this story touched your heart, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more exciting stories like this. After all, here, each story reminds us that animals have a unique way of changing our lives. Have you ever felt like an animal might know more than it lets on? As if he understands things that even we can't explain. Some say that dogs have a sixth sense, a silent ability to perceive feelings, intentions, and even paths they have never taken before. But how would this be possible? That morning, Sophia was still sleepy when she pushed open the door to start another day. The smell of coffee from the kitchen, mixed with the fresh air from the street and the sun, still shy, tried to break through the remaining clouds from the previous night. She blinked a few times, getting used to the brightness, when something caught her attention. There, on the sidewalk in front of his house, was the dog. The same golden-haired mongrel, now a little less scared, but still carrying that mixture of uncertainty and expectation in his eyes. He didn't move. He just watched Sophia, as if waiting for something. The girl's heart skipped a beat. How did he know where she lived? She was sure that the night before, after giving him a piece of bread, she went straight home without the dog accompanying her. At least that's what I thought. But there he was, as if he knew exactly where to look for her. For a moment, she didn't know what to do. His mother, busy in the kitchen, hadn't noticed anything yet. His father had already left for work. It was just her and that dog, trapped in a silent moment, where only the eyes spoke. What did he want? She took a hesitant step outside. The dog didn't move away. He just watched her, his ears slightly raised as if trying to understand her every movement. Sophia looked around, waiting for someone to come up and say that that dog belonged to someone, that he hadn't, in fact, followed in her footsteps the night before. But the street was empty. Carefully, she crouched down and reached out to him. This time, the dog didn't retreat like before. He remained where he was, just tilting his head slightly, sniffing the air, taking in every detail of that interaction. It was as if he was trying to decide if he could trust her. Sophia smiled. "You found me," he murmured softly, without waiting for a response. The dog blinked slowly, and then, for the first time, it moved its tail. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement, but for Sophia, it meant a lot. He was there because he wanted to. He chose her. The girl stood up, feeling a different warmth in her chest. It was a mix of surprise, joy, and a hint of responsibility. If he had found her, that meant she was now part of his story. But what would she do now? Sophia looked inside the house. If his mother saw him there, would she let him stay? Would he agree to leave after having decided that this was his new point of reference? Before he could think of a response, a noise from inside the house broke the silence. The dog jumped back slightly, alert. His trust in Sophia was growing, but his fear of the unknown was even greater. The kitchen door opened and her mother appeared, drying her hands on her apron. "Sophia, what are you doing out there?" The girl hesitated. He knew that if he said the wrong thing, his mother might shoo the dog away. Not that she was cruel, but like so many other adults, she perhaps didn't understand what Sophia felt at that moment. "Mom, he was here, waiting for me." The mother looked at the dog and frowned. "Is that stray dog from yesterday?" Sophia nodded. "He followed me." The woman sighed and crossed her arms. "Daughter, stray dogs do this all the time. If someone treats them well, they come back. But that doesn't mean we can keep it." Sophia felt her heart tighten. "But he's different. He's not just asking for food, Mom. He chose me." The dog, as if understanding the conversation, remained sitting, motionless, his eyes fixed on Sophia's mother. There was no aggression in him, just patience. The woman sighed again. "You know we can't have a dog right now. What if he is sick? What if it belongs to someone?" Sophia looked at the dog. He didn't look sick, just thin and tired. And as for it belonging to someone, well, if it had an owner, that owner had left it alone for a long time. Sophia's mother seemed to realize that her daughter wouldn't give up so easily. "Let's do it like this. You can give him some food and water, but only outside. No letting him in, understand?" The girl's face lit up. "Understood." She ran inside, and a few minutes later came back with a plate of food and a bowl of water. The dog watched every movement, but did not move forward immediately. He waited for Sophia to move away a little, as if she was still getting used to the idea of trust. As soon as he started eating, Sophia watched him closely. Something inside her said that this story was just beginning. This dog was not like the others I saw on the street. He had something different. The question that couldn't come out of his head was, how did he know where to find her? Having been followed would already be a strange possibility, but something in the dog's manner suggested it wasn't just a common instinct. It was almost as if he felt where he should go. What if he had a past that no one knew about? Sophia didn't know that. At that moment, she was about to get involved in something much bigger than she imagined, because Billy, yes, that puppy would soon get a name, wasn't just a lost dog. He carried a secret, and the reason for choosing Sophia was yet to be revealed. But that morning, all that mattered was that he was there, waiting for her. Have you ever felt like an animal wanted to tell you something, even without words, as if somehow he was trying to communicate with you in a way that only feelings can translate? Many people believe that dogs have this almost magical ability to show gratitude, express love, and even return acts of kindness in a unique way. But could a stray dog, who probably never had much, have anything to offer? That morning, Sophia was still trying to understand what it meant to find that dog in front of her house. It was unusual for an unknown animal to show so much loyalty to someone who, until the previous day, was just a stranger to him. But there he was, as if he knew he had found a safe haven. What she didn't imagine was that Billy, yes, that would be the name she would start calling that dog, also wanted to give back what he had received. After managing to convince his mother to let him stay at least in the yard and give him some food, Sophia spent the day thinking about him. What would your life have been like before that encounter? Would he have had a home, an owner, or has he always lived on the streets, depending on the kindness of strangers? When late afternoon arrived and the sky began to turn orange, Sophia decided to go out again to see him. Your heart quickened a little as you opened the door, fearing that he was gone. But Billy was still there, and he didn't have his hands, or rather, his paws empty. Right next to the plate where Sophia had left food that morning, there was something different. Small, a little dingy, but clearly placed there on purpose. An old teddy bear, worn out by time, with a loose seam on its belly and one of its eyes missing. Sophia frowned, confused. Why was that bear there? She looked around, trying to understand where he could have come from. Maybe it was lying nearby, and Billy just picked it up to play with. But something inside her said that wasn't it. She approached slowly, took the little animal between her hands, and carefully looked at Billy. "Did you bring this?" The dog, which had been lying down until then, raised its ears and wagged its tail slightly. His eyes seemed to say something, as if he was waiting for her reaction. Sophia hugged the teddy bear to her chest. It was such a simple gesture and, at the same time, so profound. That dog, who had nothing, who lived alone on the streets, had felt the need to give thanks. He brought what he had, the only treasure he possibly kept. That made the girl's heart sink. What did that toy mean to him? Sophia sat on the floor next to Billy, the teddy bear still in her hands. The cub remained attentive, but did not move forward to take it back. It really was a gift, a small sign that for him, Sophia was already more than just a person who gave him food. He chose her. Sophia looked closely at the teddy bear, analyzing the details. The worn fabric, the marks of time, the dirt that indicated it had been through a lot. Did this toy come from your life before the streets? Had anyone ever loved Billy? She didn't know, but she felt that that object carried a story. "Thank you, Billy," she whispered, and for the first time she raised her hand to his head, stroking his disheveled hair. He didn't back down. He just closed his eyes for a moment, as if that touch was something he didn't even remember what it was like to feel. Sophia's mother watched everything from the door, without saying anything. There was something about that dog that even she was beginning to notice. He wasn't just an abandoned dog. He had a past, and perhaps he had found his new chance at a future. That night, Sophia took the teddy bear to her room, leaving it next to the bed. Something inside her said that this was not a simple object. It was a bond, a small sign of trust. But Billy's story was just beginning, because that gift wasn't just a gesture of gratitude, it was also a piece of the mystery surrounding his life before meeting Sophia. And soon she would discover that Billy didn't show up at her house by chance. Have you ever had the feeling that something was wrong, even though you couldn't explain why? As if suddenly the air around you became thicker, the noises of the night became different, and the silence carried an invisible weight. Some people ignore these signs, thinking it's just imagination. But animals feel. They perceive what our eyes don't see and what our ears don't hear. Billy had already demonstrated that he was no ordinary dog. He had found Sophia without anyone knowing how. He had brought a gift as a form of gratitude. Now, that night, he would show that his presence there was not just a fluke. Everything seemed normal until then. Sophia had dinner with her parents, talked about school, helped her mother wash the dishes, and went up to her room taking with her the old teddy bear that Billy had given her. Even worn out, dirty, and with one of its eyes. Missing, that little animal now had a special meaning. It was a symbol of that unexpected connection, a piece of Billy's mysterious past that he chose to share with her. Already lying down, covered by the duvet, Sophia looked at the ceiling, listening to the soft sounds of the night. The wind swayed the tree branches outside, and every now and then the sound of a distant car cut through the silence. His thoughts revolved around the dog. Did he ever have a house? Someone who took care of him? Or, have you always lived alone, wandering the streets, not knowing where to sleep the next night? Sleep was beginning to weigh heavily on her eyes when a sound made her wake up immediately. Era Billy. Outside in the yard, he started barking with an intensity that Sophia had never heard before. It wasn't just any bark, the kind that dogs let out of boredom or when they see a cat passing by. This one was insistent, full of urgency. He barked, stopped for a second, sniffed the air, and started. Barking again, running from side to side as if he was trying to find something. Sophia's heart accelerated. She sat up in bed and tried to hear better. Billy's barking seemed to be getting more intense. So, a different sound, a dry beat, low but distinct, as if something or someone had bumped into something outside. Sophia quickly got up and ran to the window. He looked into the yard and saw Billy agitated, running to the fence, smelling the ground, coming back, turning in circles as if he was trying to warn about something. His fur stood on end, and he looked ready to face anything. She felt a shiver run down her spine. Billy wasn't barking at anything. The bedroom door opened and his father appeared, his expression confused and a little irritated by the interruption of his sleep. "What is happening?" "It's Billy. He looks very strange," Sophia replied, pointing to the backyard. The father rubbed his eyes, still a little drowsy, and walked to the window. But as soon as he looked, outside his face changed. "Stay here." He hurriedly left, going down the stairs, and Sophia felt her heart race. She wanted to obey, but curiosity and a strange fear made her follow him. With light steps, she went down the steps, stopping near the kitchen door, watching her father open the door that led to the backyard. Billy didn't look away. His barking cut through the silence of the night like an insistent warning. Sophia's father, still trying to understand what was happening, squinted under the yellow light of the yard and took a few hesitant steps towards the dog. Billy, far from calming down, ran to the side gate, sniffing frantically at a specific spot near the fence, his paws turning over the damp earth as if he wanted to unearth something invisible to human eyes. His tail was stiff, his ears pricked, his entire body alert. He wasn't just reacting to any noise, he was trying to show something. Sophia's father frowned and, with a slight tightening in his chest, turned on. The outside light, the yellowish beam, illuminated the yard, casting long shadows on the grass and revealing details previously hidden by the darkness. It was then that he saw it. Footprints. They were there, clearly marked in the wet earth, starting near the fence and heading towards the farthest corner of the yard. They were clear, deep enough to show that someone had passed by recently. Very recently. Sophia's father stopped. His eyes roamed the garden, analyzing every detail with a precision. That hadn't been there before. His heart beat faster now, a protective instinct awakening within him. Billy continued to growl, low and continuous, as if he sensed that that presence still hovered in the air, invisible, but not far away. Sophia, who had sneaked down the stairs, peered through the crack in the door, her breath caught in her chest. She had never seen her father like that, motionless, with his shoulders tense and his eyes fixed on the floor, as if he was trying to put together a puzzle whose pieces were wrong. Then she saw him take his cell phone out of his pocket and with slightly stiff fingers dial a number. "Hi, it's Daniel. Can you come by? I think someone was in my yard." Sophia felt a shiver run down her spine. His father called the police. His gaze returned to Billy, who had now stopped barking but remained alert, his eyes shining in the porch light. He didn't need to speak. He didn't need to gesture. Everything in his posture said one thing. "It saw, I knew." And it was at that moment that Sophia realized something that had not crossed her mind until then. Billy didn't appear there by chance. He didn't just find his way home. He had a reason to be there, and this story was far from over. Some things never fade from a puppy's memory. The voice of someone calling him by name, the smell of his first home, the warm feeling of a safe embrace. But in the same way that they keep the good memories, they also remember the fear, the abandonment, the threats they once faced. Time may pass, places may change, but instinct never fails. That morning, the atmosphere inside Sophia's house was still charged with the events of the previous night. His father hadn't slept well, always paying attention to any strange noises outside. The mother, worried, tried to act normal, but her eyes were constantly looking at the door, as if she was waiting for something else to happen. And Billy was different. He no longer looked like the same dog that, the day before, had wagged his tail at Sophia and left a teddy bear as a gift. Now he walked back and forth across the yard, restless, with his body tense and his gaze fixed on the fence, as if waiting for something or someone to appear again. Sophia's father was talking to a police officer at the door of the house. They had decided to review the neighborhood security cameras to understand what was happening. Who would have been in the yard? What did that person want? It was then that, after a few hours, the answer arrived. The images showed a man. He appeared on the set shortly after midnight, walking slowly down the street, stopping in front of Sophia's house for too long for anyone just passing by. He looked around attentively and then approached the side gate. But the scariest thing was the moment Billy realized his presence. As soon as the man entered camera range, Billy reacted like never before. His body became rigid, the hair on his back stood up, and he began to bark desperately. It wasn't the barking of a dog that simply gets scared of a stranger. It was something deeper, filled with fury. Billy knew that man. Sophia, who was watching the images alongside her father, felt a chill run down her spine. How was it possible? Billy had barely arrived at that house and was already showing an enormous protective instinct. But this was different. The dog wasn't just protecting Sophia and her family. He was reacting to something from the past. The police officer paused the key, recording, and looked at the girl's father. This dog, where did it come from? Sophia hugged her arms to her body and looked at Billy, who was now watching the television screen as if he understood exactly what they were talking about. He appeared here alone. My daughter gave him food, and the next day he was waiting for us at the door. The policeman frowned. This could be a coincidence, but he sighed, adjusting his hat. I know this dog. Silence took over the room. Sophia's eyes widened. His father crossed his arms. What do you mean, do you know? The officer scratched the back of his head, glancing at Billy before continuing. A few years ago, there was a case here in the city. A family reported being threatened by a dangerous man, someone who had problems with the law. At the time, we tried to protect this family, but in the midst of the confusion, they had to move quickly. The detail that caught the most attention in that story is that they had a dog. Sophia felt a tightness in her chest. A golden dog? The police officer nodded. The same look, the same posture. He was a faithful dog who didn't let anyone strangers approach the house. But in the middle of the change, something happened. He disappeared. The family left without him, perhaps without a choice, perhaps hoping he would find them later. But he was never seen again. Until now. Billy remained there, motionless, but his breathing was rapid. He listened. He understood. Sophia knelt down beside him, running her hand gently over his head. You remember him, don't you? He whispered. Billy tilted his head a little, his deep eyes filled with something Sophia had never seen before. The policeman continued. The man who was hanging around your house is the same one who threatened that family years ago. He was here, and Billy was the first to notice. Sophia looked at her father, her heart pounding against her chest. He didn't come here by chance. Billy wasn't just wandering around, aimlessly when he found me. He was running away, or worse, he was looking for protection because he knew the danger was returning. Sophia's father ran his hands over his face, absorbing that information. The policeman sighed. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain. This dog tried to protect a family before. Now, he chose you. Sophia looked at Billy and felt an intense emotion take over her chest. He had faced danger before. He knew exactly what was happening, and this time, he wasn't alone. But what did that man want now? Would he return? What did Billy know that they didn't already know? What do you think Billy was hiding? Have you ever noticed how some dogs just know when something isn't right? As if, in silence, they felt what we could not see. As if they were attentive guardians, unable to relax while danger still lurked. Billy was exactly like that. He wasn't just a stray dog who found a family by chance. He had a purpose. That morning should have been peaceful. After discovering the footprints in the backyard and confirming that a dangerous man had been there, the police increased security in the neighborhood. Some neighbors were notified, spotlights were installed in the darkest parts of the garden, and the gate was locked more carefully. Sophia's father spoke at length with one of the police officers, ensuring that any suspicious movement would be reported immediately. Everything was apparently under control. But Billy knew better. From the moment the police left, his behavior changed. Before, even though he was suspicious and cautious, he had already started to accept his new routine. He had learned that Sophia always showed up in the morning to see him, that she received food and affection, that her space there was guaranteed. But now his instinct spoke louder. He didn't move away from the door. He didn't leave the yard, even when the gate was opened. He didn't eat as calmly as before, because with each bite, he interrupted his gesture to lift his head and sniff the air. His eyes were always attentive, analyzing every movement, every sound. If a leaf fell from the tree, he noticed it. If a branch broke in the distance, it would stiffen. He didn't bark for no reason. He just expected. Sophia noticed this immediately. The first time you asked him to play, he didn't even wag his tail. He stood still, watching. When she got closer, she felt his body tense, his breathing heavier. "What is it, Billy?" Sophia asked, crouching down next to him. He didn't respond, obviously, but his expression said it all. He couldn't to relax. Sophia ran her hand over her ears and looked out at the silent yard. The morning sun cast long shadows across the grass, and the chilly night air had not yet completely disappeared. Everything seemed too calm, but if Billy was still worried, then maybe the calm wasn't real. When Sophia's father left for work, he noticed that the dog remained in exactly the same place. His gaze followed the man until he walked through the gate and then returned to surveying his surroundings. "That dog won't leave here for anything, huh?" he commented, trying to sound light. Sophia nodded. "He knows something isn't right yet." His father sighed, casting a glance at the yard before grabbing his car keys. "If he feels anything strange, you let me know." She nodded again, but the truth was that Billy already I was feeling. The day passed slowly. Billy barely moved. In the afternoon, Sophia noticed that he had changed position, but not to rest. It was now close to the side gate, the same one where the footprints had been found the night before. His ears were pricked, his breathing steady, his gaze focused. At the end of the afternoon, Sophia's mother went out to water the plants and stopped when she saw the dog sitting there motionless. "That dog isn't really going to go away, right?" "He knows that the danger is not over yet," Sophia replied, repeating what she had already said to her father. The mother hesitated, looking at Billy, who didn't even blink. Maybe he's right. Dinner that night was silent. Sophia felt a strange tension in the air, as if everyone was waiting for something without knowing exactly what. When he went up to his room, he looked out the window and saw Billy still there, now lying down, but not sleeping. She knew he would continue like this for the entire night, and when dawn came, he would have reason to. Some nights feel too quiet, as if the silence is just there waiting to be broken. Sophia's house was immersed in this false calm when an unexpected sound echoed through the garage. First, a subtle noise, a metallic click, as if something had been touched lightly. Then, a scratch, a quick slide that made Sophia's father open his eyes in the darkness. He held his breath for a moment, trying to listen better. It was then that a louder noise filled the corridor, a dry, abrupt sound, as if something had been knocked over. Sophia, upstairs, woke up with a start, her heart racing before her mind could even understand what was happening. The house, which had previously been plunged into silence, now seemed alive, pulsing with alert. Billy, outside, had already felt it before anyone had even woken up. Its fur stood on end, its muscles tensed, its eyes fixed in the direction of the sound, before its mouth opened to release a powerful, deep and continuous bark. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a call. It was a declaration of war. Sophia's father got up hurriedly, his feet touching the cold floor while his hand was already looking for the door keys. He crossed the corridor with firm steps, his senses heightened, adrenaline coursing through every muscle in his body. The kitchen was dark, but when I opened the door that led to the backyard, the dim light from the street lamp revealed movement in the garden. It was quick, a shadow sliding across the lawn, a figure fleeing among the plants. Sophia's father's eyes widened at the exact moment Billy took off like lightning. The dog didn't hesitate, he didn't wait for orders. His body threw himself forward as if an invisible force was pulling him. His breathing labored and focused only on one goal, reaching the invader. Their barks echoed through the neighborhood, reverberating between the walls. As their paws tore up the wet earth, the shadow ran, stumbling through the bushes, trying to climb over the fence. But Billy was getting closer. Sophia, frozen in the doorway, felt her chest tight. I had never seen Billy like that. He had always been protective, attentive, but now he was pure fury. There was no fear in his eyes, only determination. His body moved with precision, each step calculated, each muscle responding to his hunter's instinct. The intruder managed to get through the fence, landing clumsily on the other side, but Billy didn't stop. The street was deserted, lit only by the scattered streetlights, their lights flickering as if they too knew something important was about to happen. The intruder continued down the sidewalk, looking back, desperate to see that Billy wasn't giving up. The dog gained ground, its barking cut through the night like a warning cry, calling anyone nearby to witness what was happening. The man turned a corner, trying to hide in a dark alley between two old buildings. Billy turned almost at the same time without missing a beat. He smelled danger, smelled fear, knew his prey was too close to escape. His barking continued, more intense, more furious, reverberating off the walls of the narrow alley. Lights started to come on. A curtain moved, a door opened, curious eyes appeared from behind the windows. The attacker realized he was cornered. The dog in front of him wouldn't back down, and now he had nowhere else to run. He looked around, calculating his chances, but every second he stopped was a second longer for more people to notice his presence. Billy didn't need to attack him. He didn't need to get any closer than he already was. He just remained there, motionless, his paws firmly on the ground, his body on high alert. His breathing quickened while his gaze said it all. I know who you are. I know what you did. You won't escape. The man took a step back, then another. His eyes darted from side to side, looking for a way out, a hole to disappear before someone called the police. But it was too late. Neighbors, awakened by the noise, were already at their doors, trying to understand what was happening. A car passed slowly, slowing down when it saw the dog standing in the middle of the alley, like a sentry blocking the way. It was only then that Billy barked again, a strong, cutting, definitive sound, a sound that made the invader shudder. He couldn't stay there any longer. He knew he needed to get out of there before it was too late. And then he ran. He passed Billy like a desperate figure, his eyes wide, his body tense. He turned the next corner and disappeared into the darkness, but not before looking back one last time and seeing that dog standing there watching. Billy didn't chase him anymore. He knew his mission had been accomplished. The city was now awake. Neighbors murmured among themselves, trying to understand what had happened, pointing to the dog that was still there like a tireless guardian. When Sophia and her father arrived, Billy looked at them, his eyes finally calmer but still alert. Sophia felt a lump in her throat. He had done it for them. The girl's father bent down and ran his hand over the dog's back, feeling its strong breathing. Billy closed his eyes for a second, as if for the first time that night he was allowing himself to rest. That morning, everyone returned home. The doors were locked again, the lights went out. The city returned to its usual silence, but something had changed. Billy was no longer just a dog who appeared out of nowhere. He was a protector. He knew that the danger could still return, but now he knew something even more important. He would never be alone again. Some truths take time to appear, but when they come to light, they change everything. That morning, Sophia's house still carried the weight of the previous night. The silence of dawn seemed different, thicker, as if every shadow in the yard still held the traces of what had happened. Sophia's father, who barely slept, left early to talk to the neighbors. The news had already spread. Everyone was talking about the mysterious man that Billy chased, about the barking that echoed down the street, about the strange movement that made the lights in the houses turn on one by one. It wasn't just another scare. Something bigger was happening, and now everyone knew it. Billy, in turn, remained attentive. He showed no fear or uneasiness. He just watched, as if he was still waiting for something, as if he knew that it hadn't ended. Sophia approached and put her hand on his head. He accepted the affection, but his eyes never left the gate. He was still on guard. That's when the phone rang. Sophia's father answered, and the police officer's voice on the other end of the line brought the answer everyone was waiting for. The man was found. He was hiding in a vacant lot a few blocks away, trying to avoid any movement that would attract attention, but it was too late. He had already been seen. He had already been recognized. The police surrounded him, and when they searched him, they found what they already suspected. Inside the backpack he carried were tools for picking. Locks, gloves, a crowbar, objects that made it clear that this was not a simple invasion. He was prepared. He knew what he was doing. The police officer asked Sophia's father to go to the police station to provide further clarification. Sophia stood at the door watching as he left. Billy followed every movement, still attentive, still connected to everything that was happening around him. He saw when the car disappeared down the street, saw when Sophia sighed deeply and went back inside. But he stayed there, because even with the invader captured, something inside him said that the story wasn't over yet. Time passed slowly. The morning continued. The wind was blowing strong. The leaves danced across the yard. Sophia tried to distract herself, but her mind still went back to the tense moments of the previous night. The images of Billy running, the furious barking, the shadow crossing the street. Everything seemed like a movie that was repeating itself over and over in his head. Then his gaze fell on something that was still on the corner table in the room, the old teddy bear that Billy had given him. Small, dirty, worn by time, but full of meaning. She picked it up and held it tight between her fingers. This dog, who appeared without warning, who found her as if he already knew he belonged in that house, was not there by chance. He carried a story, a past that, until that moment, was still a mystery. The phone rang again, breaking his thoughts. Her mother answered, exchanged a few quick words and then hung up, looking at Sophia with a different sparkle in her eyes. His father was coming home and had answers. When the car pulled into the garage, Billy was the first to react. He didn't run, he didn't bark, but he stood firm, waiting, as if he knew something important was about to be said. Sophia's father got out of the car, calmly closed the door, and stopped for a moment before speaking. The man found in the vacant lot was not just any invader. He was already wanted by the police for involvement in a series of robberies and attempted break-ins at several houses in the region. He was meticulous, discreet, knew how to move without attracting attention, but there was one detail that made everything change. When he was confronted by the police and asked about the previous night, his reaction was not surprise due to the fact that they discovered his presence. What made him shudder was the dog. He asked about Billy. He asked if he was still there. His gaze, previously cold and calculating, trembled for the first time as he remembered the dog that had chased him without hesitation. Billy had made it clear that this house was not an easy target. Sophia hugged the teddy bear to her chest. His heart was beating fast. It wasn't a coincidence, it wasn't luck. Billy had a reason for being there, and for the first time, she realized that she was getting closer to discovering what really linked that dog to the danger that surrounded her family. Some answers are right before our eyes, but we can only see them at the right time. Sophia always knew Billy was different. From the moment he appeared in her life, there was something about him that seemed beyond chance, as if he were following a purpose that no one fully understood. Now, after the night of terror, the chase in the alley, the capture of the intruder, all she wanted was to believe that she was finally safe. But Billy still didn't look satisfied. The next morning, the sun had barely risen when Sophia heard a familiar sound outside, the soft, repetitive noise of paws moving the earth, of soil being moved with precision. Billy was digging. She quickly ran downstairs, pulling on a coat to protect herself from the cold morning wind, and ran into the backyard. Billy was focused, his head down, his front paws working non-stop. Fine dust rose around him, small stones shifting as he sank his claws into the damp soil. "Billy, what are you doing?" He didn't look at her. He didn't wag. His tail, he didn't interrupt his work, just dug. Sophia approached, feeling a twinge of curiosity mixed with a slight fear. He had never done this before. I had never demonstrated this type of behavior, this almost desperate insistence on finding something. It was then that his father appeared at the kitchen door, attracted by the sound. He looked at Billy, then Sophia, and frowned. What is he looking for? I don't know, but he seems determined. Her father walked over to the dog, watching him. for a moment before crouching down next to the hole. Billy, panting, finally stopped. Its dirt-smeared snout trembled slightly, its eyes shone with something that Sophia couldn't decipher. He took a step back, leaving space free, and then looked directly at Sophia's father, as if to say, "Now it's up to you." The silence between them lasted only a few seconds. Sophia's father reached into the newly dug hole and pulled out something small, hard, and covered in dirt. Sophia held her breath as he cleaned the object with his fingertips. It was a necklace, an old necklace worn by time with a thin metallic chain. On the round, slightly dented pendant, there was something engraved, a name, Bob. The world seemed to stop for a moment. Sophia felt a shiver run down her spine. His father turned the necklace between his fingers, his expression closed, as if trying to fit together the pieces of a puzzle that was only now beginning to make sense. Where did that come from? He muttered more to himself than anyone. Sophia looked at Billy, who didn't look away from the necklace. His breathing was heavy, his body rigid. It was as if that small object carried something much bigger than they could imagine. "Billy," Sophia whispered, "is this yours?" The dog tilted its head slightly but did not move. That name, Bob, was it Billy's real name? Was it from someone he knew? Sophia's father cleaned the pendant better and turned to his daughter. "That was buried here a long time ago. The chain is oxidized. The pendant is already worn out. It's not something recent." Sophia felt her heart accelerate. "Do you think this necklace belonged to Billy's previous owner?" The father remained silent for a moment, then looked at the dog again. "Perhaps. Or maybe it's more than that." Sophia bit her lip, holding the necklace carefully. If Billy dug him up now, after everything that had happened, it couldn't be a coincidence. He knew that necklace was there. He knew that at some point, someone would need to see him. But how? Billy lay down on the ground, resting his head on his paws. He looked tired, but at the same time, relieved. As if finally, he had shown something that he had kept inside for a long time. Sophia held the necklace tighter. Now, she knew that that dog was still hiding secrets, and she wouldn't stop until she discovered the whole truth. Have you ever felt like some bonds just can't be explained? As if somehow certain connections were destined to happen? From the moment Billy entered Sophia's life, something inside her told her he wasn't just any puppy. He didn't appear by chance. Luckily, he didn't find it. He had a purpose, an instinct that went beyond simple loyalty. And Sophia knew she could trust him. But that day in the park, that trust was put to the test in ways she never would have imagined. The last few days had been intense. After the invasion of the house, the pursuit of the intruder, and the discovery of the necklace buried in the backyard, Sophia couldn't stop thinking about Billy and the mystery he carried. His father was still trying to understand how that necklace got there and why Billy dug it up at that moment. But no matter how many questions remained, one thing was certain. That puppy was not there by chance. That afternoon, Sophia and her mother decided to go out to relax. The tension of the last few days still hung over the house, and the mother thought that a walk in the park would be good for both of them. Billy went along, as always. From the day he appeared, he never left Sophia again. Now more than ever, it seemed like he knew his place was by her side. The park was peaceful. The blue sky contrasted with the green leaves of the trees, and a gentle breeze was blowing, bringing with it the smell of freshly cut grass. Children played on the swings, adults walked slowly along the stone paths, and some dogs ran free, chasing balls and playing with their owners. But Billy wasn't there to play. Even with all the tranquility around him, he remained attentive. His eyes darted around the room, his posture was firm, his ears moved at the slightest strange sound. Sophia noticed. "Mom, Billy is acting strange again." The mother looked at the dog, who was walking next to Sophia without the relaxation that any other dog would have in such a pleasant park. He didn't jump, he didn't run, he didn't pull the leash. He just watched. "Maybe he's still tense because of what happened," said the mother, trying to sound calm. Sophia wasn't so sure. Billy sniffed the air as if trying to find a familiar scent. Something bothered him. Sophia got a better grip on the leash and looked around. Everything seemed normal. People laughed, talked, passed from one place to another, without realizing that, for Billy, the world wasn't so peaceful after all. That's when it all happened. Suddenly, a man approached too quickly. He was coming towards them, his hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed, his posture tense. Sophia didn't have time to react. Everything was so fast that his mind couldn't process it immediately, but Billy understood before she did. The moment the man took his first sharp step to Sophia's side, Billy advanced. Time seemed to slow down. The dog lunged forward, pulling hard on the leash, his body lunging toward the man before he could even reach out. A ferocious growl echoed through the park, a deep, low sound that made Sophia's chest vibrate. Billy wasn't just barking, he was warning. The man froze. For a second, everything was silent. People around turned to see what was happening. Sophia's mother grabbed her daughter's arm tightly, instinctively pulling her back. Billy maintained his position. Her body was a shield between Sophia and the man, his paws firmly on the ground, his chest inflated, his gaze fixed and threatening. The man hesitated. Their eyes darted from Billy to Sophia, and then to the people who were now watching them. He realized he had attracted too much attention. He didn't say anything, just backed away. He took a step back, then another. He turned and walked quickly away, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just tried something. Billy remained motionless, his eyes following the man's every movement until he disappeared into the trees. Only then did he let out one last growl, a low guttural sound, like a final warning. Sophia felt her heart beating so hard that she could hear the echo in her own chest. "What was that?" his mother murmured, still holding his arm. Sophia looked at Billy. The dog turned his head towards her, his breathing still quick but his eyes calmer. He was saying without words, "I protected you." A lump formed in Sophia's throat. She knelt down beside the dog and wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling the warmth of his fur against her face. "Thank you, Billy." The people around went back to their activities. The park continued at its normal pace, as if nothing had happened. But for Sophia, her mother, and Billy that afternoon would never be forgotten. The girl's mother sighed deeply, running her hand through her hair and looking at the dog in a different way. "I don't think there are any more doubts. This dog, he really knows what he's doing." Sophia looked at Billy and smiled. She always knew that. Some stories seem to close in a perfect cycle, where the past meets the present and everything suddenly makes sense. Billy appeared in Sophia's life as a mystery, a silent shadow that followed her home, a guardian who seemed to know exactly where he was supposed to be. He faced danger without hesitation. He protected Sophia as if she were part of something he already knew, as if his mission was not just instinct, but a calling. Now, after everything that had happened, Sophia knew that Billy was never just a lost puppy. He already had a home, it once belonged to someone, and somehow he never forgot what it meant to protect those he loved. After the episode in the park, it became impossible to deny Billy's importance to the family. Sophia couldn't stop thinking about the look on the dog's face when the thief tried to get closer. It wasn't just a reflex, it wasn't just a random bark. Billy acted with precision, as if he had done this before, and the truth was that he had already done it. He had protected a family before. The only difference was that this time he had found a new family to call his own. The last few days have been different. Sophia's father, who initially saw Billy as just another street dog, now saw him differently. There was respect in his eyes, a silent admiration for the animal that not only saved his daughter, but also prevented something worse from happening to all of them. Sophia's mother, who was hesitant at first, now always left a bowl of food outside without even needing anyone to ask. And Sophia already knew that her heart belonged to that dog from the first moment their eyes met in the square. Billy, on the other hand, seemed to be, for the first time in a long time, at peace. He was still observant, still observing his surroundings, but something about him had changed. His body was more relaxed, his breathing calmer. For the first time, he slept without having to keep one eye open. His place was no longer uncertain. He no longer had to wonder where he should go or who he should protect. He knew, but something was missing. That night, as the family ate dinner in the kitchen, Sophia's father looked at Billy, who was lying next to the door. Cub raised his head and returned the look. There was a brief silence, as if both were understanding each other without needing words. The man sighed, passed his hand over his forehead, and then looked at Sophia. "I think we've put this off for too long." Sophia frowned, not understanding. The father got up, pulled out a chair, and sat down next to his daughter. "This dog saved our family. He's not just a street dog." Sophia felt her heart accelerate. "Good." He smiled slightly and looked at Billy. Again. "He deserves a home." The words were still in the air when Sophia threw herself into her father's arms, unable to contain her emotion. Billy watched the scene, without understanding what was happening, but when he saw the girl smiling and holding back tears, he approached and put his head in her arms, as he did whenever he wanted affection. Sophia laughed and hugged him tightly, feeling the warmth of his fur against her face. "Welcome to the family, Billy," she whispered. The dog didn't wag its tail right away. He just laid his head on her lap and stayed there, as if in that moment he knew that for the first time in a long time, he was home. Some stories start so simply that they don't seem destined to change lives. A look, a gesture, a piece of divided bread. Sophia didn't know on that cold day in the square that when she bent down to offer food to a stray dog, she was opening the door to something much bigger. She had no idea that that thin, scared dog with dirty hair and tired eyes would become her greatest protector, her most faithful companion, her guardian for life. But Billy knew. Time passed, days turned into years, and the girl who once found a lonely dog grew up next to him. Billy was present at every stage of his life, following his changes, his discoveries, his joys and challenges. He was there on lazy Sunday mornings, lying next to Sophia's bed, patiently waiting for her to wake up. He was there on the hard days, when nothing seemed to go right, when the worries of school and adolescence made her want to hide from the world. In those moments, Billy would just lay his head on his lap, as if to say, "I'm here." The house was never the same after Billy joined the family. His footsteps could be heard throughout the yard every morning, his constant presence bringing quiet comfort to everyone. He knew every corner, every smell, every routine. I knew exactly when Sophia would arrive from school and waited anxiously at the gate, her tail wagging, her eyes shining with joy. It never mattered how tired or upset Sophia was. Seeing Billy waiting for her made everything seem better. He was also there in times of danger, like that time when Sophia, already a teenager, was walking home alone in the early evening and noticed someone following her. Fear took over her, but Billy, always by her side, felt it before she even realized it. He stopped, turned around slowly, his body tense, his hair standing on end, and he let out a low, threatening growl. The stranger hesitated, backed away and disappeared into the darkness. Sophia knew that if Billy hadn't been there, the story could have been different. Billy didn't need words to show what he felt. His love was in the way he always stayed by Sophia's side when she was sick, in the way he followed her every step around the house, in the unwavering protection he offered without expecting anything in return. The years passed too quickly. Sophia grew up, became a young adult, and Billy, whose hair was already starting to turn grey, continued to be her guardian. His gait was no longer as agile as before, but his loyalty never changed. He still waited for her at the door, still followed her around the house, still slept at the foot of her bed like he had since day one. Time has a subtle way of passing, almost imperceptibly, until one day we realize that everything has changed. It was like that for Sophia. For years, Billy was by her side as a constant presence, a tireless guardian who accompanied her in every step, in every phase of life. But that afternoon, as the sun hid between the trees in the backyard, she observed him with a different gaze. For the first time, she didn't just see the loyal friend who always ran to meet her, who jumped for joy when he saw her, who never hesitated to protect her. For the first time, she saw time stamped on it. The golden hairs that once shone in the sun were mixed with white strands. His body, which had once been agile and strong, now moved more carefully, with the caution of someone who no longer had the same energy as before. His eyes, however, remained the same deep eyes that, years ago, met hers in that cold square, the same eyes that followed her home and never left her. Sophia felt her chest tighten. It was strange to realize that while she was growing up, Billy was getting older. For so long she had never stopped to think about it. Billy had always been there, so present, so eternal, that the idea that he too felt the weight of time had never crossed his mind. But now, seeing him lying in the yard, feeling the gentle breeze ruffle the hair on his face, she realized that the years had passed for him too. She crouched down beside him, feeling the cool grass beneath her knees, and ran her hand gently over his back. Billy closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, feeling the touch he knew so well. He didn't need to open his eyes to know it was Sophia there. He always knew, from day one. She stroked the white hair mixed with gold, feeling each strand under her fingers, as if she wanted to memorize that texture, as if she wanted to engrave his presence on her skin. Billy sighed, laying his head on her lap, and Sophia felt his breathing rhythmic and calm, unlike the times when he was on alert, ready to protect her from any threat. Now, he no longer had to worry. Now, he knew he was safe. She looked up at the sky, trying to hold back the wave of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. How many times was that dog by her side when she needed it? How many times had he noticed her sadness before she even said a word? How many times had he stood between her and danger without hesitation, as if his only mission in the world was to protect her? She looked down and smiled slightly, her eyes teary as her fingers slid through Billy's soft hair. "You were always here for me," he whispered. Billy didn't respond, but he didn't need to. The way his body relaxed against hers, the way his breathing sounded serene, the way he remained there, feeling the warmth of Sophia's presence, said more than any words could. He knew. I always knew. Sophia took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment, letting that moment drag on, letting time slow down for at least a second. And it was there, with Billy leaning on her lap, that she understood something she had never thought of before. All of this happened because one day she decided to stop. Because among so many people who walked the same path in that square, among everyone who looked away or ignored that scared thin dog she chose to see, he chose to care. He chose to share a piece of bread with an animal that no one else saw. She thought that night she had saved Billy, but in the end, Billy also saved her, forever. Some stories remind us that small gestures can change everything, that one look, one choice, one simple attitude can transform lives forever. Today you followed Billy and Sophia's journey, saw how a moment of compassion created an unbreakable bond, and how that bond has strengthened over the years. Stories like this make us feel something different, a tightness in our chest, a real connection, and must be shared so that people understand the dimension of love and loyalty of animals. So subscribe to the channel and leave a like so that this story reaches more people. Now, imagine how many more incredible stories are yet to come. Moments that will excite, surprise, and perhaps even reveal something you never imagined. The next video is already appearing on the screen, and believe me, it brings something even more special. If Billy touched you, wait until you see what comes next. In the meantime, leave a comment in the comments "Guardian," because that's exactly what Billy was, a true protector. And of course, if this story made you feel something, sharing that feeling is the best way to make more people have that same experience.